Well, hi there. These are blue Komodo Island pit vipers, often called a blue Insularis due to their scientific name, Trimeresurus insularis. And the reality is that not all of them are blue. They also come in green and yellow as well as a host of other colors. In fact, the blue phase is rare in the wild. And while the species is found across Indonesia, the blue phase comes primarily from the Komodo Islands. Islands famous for their dragons. But this blue Komodo Island phase has really become popular recently. And looking at it, it isn't difficult to tell why. There really aren't that many blue snakes out there. And vipers of any color are gloriously beautiful. This has to be one of the most unique and beautiful snakes on the planet. But is it a good pet? And is the blue Insularis viper the best pet snake for you? To figure this out, I've traveled to Florida to meet up with my friends Chandler and Tyler, who keep this species, to give the blue Insularis a score based on our 5 categories, which are handleability, care, hardiness, availability, and upfront costs. Whoa! Back in Utah. That was fast. Well, I guess this is a good opportunity to talk to you about the sponsor of today's video, BetterHelp. Imagine, if you will, that you wanted some ridiculously good Mexican food, but you had to choose from the Mexican restaurants within, say, 5 blocks of your house. Would you find what you really want? Or would you do better if you could search all over the country? Think if it wasn't just something trivial like Mexican food, but maybe something really, really important, like picking a therapist. Imagine that you had to pick from only the therapists in your general area with their long wait lists and extremely high prices. Do you think you'd get what you want? Or would you rather choose from over 33,000 licensed therapists to find the one that's just right for you? BetterHelp provides that exact tool. They will match you up to the right therapist for you. And if that therapist doesn't turn out to be the right one for you, you can totally switch. It won't cost you any more. You won't have to go through your insurance or anything like that. And I think that's a pretty cool tool. If you don't have the option to transport across country and with the snap of your fingers, like I do, well, then you're gonna need a tool like this that can connect you remotely all over the place. And if you use our link, betterhelp.com/ClintReptiles, which is down in the description, you'll get 10% off your first month. Therapy can be beneficial for so many people, whether you're battling a clinical issue or just facing everyday challenges. I hope if you ever need it, you'll consider giving BetterHelp a try. If you're struggling, don't hesitate. Click the link in the description or head to betterhelp.com/ClintReptiles. All right, I'm going back to Florida. When it comes to handleability, I have some good news and some bad news. Here's some good news. If you let Big Al hit you in the hand with a sledgehammer, you'll probably survive. But I'd probably say that it would be better to not let Big Al do this. So the good news is that Insularis pit viper bites are fairly common in the wild and deaths are very rare. But the bad news is that the bite is still going to be pretty horrifying. We're talking pain, swelling, necrosis, and considerable bleeding, both external and internal. You could easily lose fingers or worse. And again, there is some chance of death, though that is unlikely. And there is no antivenom formulated specifically for the venom of the Insularis pit viper. So they can give you a generic antivenom, they can treat your symptoms, but that's really the best they can do for you. This is going to be as horrible in many ways as a sledgehammer smash to the hand, and probably even more life-threatening. They're also somewhat notorious for biting. A large percentage of all venomous snake bites within their range are from Insularis vipers and other members of their genus. And when they bite, they tend to hang on. These guys hunt birds and such up in the trees. If you don't hold on, there will be no finding it later. But good news, they are much easier to handle with proper tools than our elapids like mambas. But if you've ever tried to get an arboreal snake like a green tree python or an emerald tree boa off of its perch using only snake hooks, you will know that this is not an easy job. And as much as I don't want to be on the receiving end of an emerald tree boa bite, if I get careless as I try to unravel it from its branch, I would take 1,000 giant-toothed boa bites before I would want to experience the flesh-melting venom of an Insularis viper. So the takeaway here is that this is a difficult snake to handle that is somewhat prone to bite and probably won't kill you, but it will mess you up. So we give it a 1 for handleability. Better than mambas or king cobras, harder to handle than a rattlesnake or a gaboon viper, but not as dangerous either. But just to make sure that score seems appropriate, I'm actually going to turn the time over to Tyler Nolan, who's going to teach me a little bit more about handling these amazing snakes.
So as far as handability goes, not really a snake that you want to take out and handle every single day. Having these snakes is more so like having a saltwater aquarium. They're beautiful animals that you keep inside of their enclosure, and they're just awesome to look at. You don't really want to take them out and play with them every day because they can get stressed out very, very easily. And a stressed out snake won't eat its food, so you definitely don't want that to happen. They're definitely something to just admire from afar, give them this beautiful, extravagant, bioactive setup that they will enjoy being in, and just admire their beauty from afar.
They're awesome. So if somebody's learning how to handle an Insularis viper for the first time, how do you get them off the branch?
Same thing as any tree python or boa, you know, they're gonna be wrapped up around a branch. You just carefully with your snake hook, get loop by loop, slowly pull them off, not to force them off of their branches, obviously. But yeah, they might be a little bit hard to get off of things because they're definitely an animal that likes to be wrapped around and secure on a branch. So it could be a pain in the butt trying to get them out of the cage, especially when you have a vision cage with 4 or 5 or even 6 of them. They're going to be all over the place. So you got to be watching out over the lip, under the lip. There'll be some behind the water bowls. You know, they're all over the place. So you got to be really careful in housing a whole bunch of them together as well. Look at that. So cool. Bright blue vipers. Very, very neat.
When it comes to care, we give the Insularis pit viper a score of 3 out of 5. I considered going lower. The reason that I considered going lower is that there really isn't a lot of information out there about care. And while their care appears to be very similar to that of the eyelash pit viper, which also gets a 3, their bite is somewhat worse. And again, there is no antivenom formulated to treat it. And since caring for a snake requires you to get into the snake's space from time to time, that really does matter. It is also a somewhat larger snake than an eyelash viper, so its strike range will be greater. But in the end, despite the lack of clear information, I don't think the care is that different from that of other tropical arboreal snakes. And I would say that this is going to be more similar, worse, but more similar to the risk of caring for an eyelash viper that gets a 3 than a green mamba, which gets a 2. So 3 it is. But just to make sure, I'm going to turn over a little bit of time to Tyler, who knows a lot more than I do about the care of these snakes.
So, to care for these little guys, what Clint was going to mention before, as babies, they're relatively easy snakes to care for as adults, but the babies are what is hard. Now, as babies, they're very, very small. They're only a few inches long. Like literally, we have some babies and some deli cups over here. They might be 4 or 5 inches long. So they eat very, very small prey items. And in the wild, they're frogs. In captivity, the best thing to feed them as babies are glass frogs, which aren't readily available anywhere, so they're kind of hard to find sometimes. If you can't find glass frogs, sometimes you can find little Cuban frogs. Even though they're technically toxic to other animals down here, they eat them just fine with no reactions. And that's the best thing to try to get them to eat. So as soon as you have them on little tiny frogs or lizards, I've had that also be the case. Sometimes they won't eat frogs and they want little anoles. Thankfully, we have plenty of them in South Florida. We can just go in our backyards, catch some little tiny anoles, and sometimes they will be more ready to eat an anole than a frog. And then once you get them just eating something, you can scent a pinky or a day-old mouse with whatever they decide to eat, and then you switch them over to that. But it is still the biggest pain in the butt. I love these guys, but they are very, very, very difficult to take care of as babies. And I would rate it, if I could just rate it myself, I would give it like a 1 out of 5, 1.5 out of 5, because it is very, very hard. I've bred lots of snakes, and these are one of the hardest babies to get to eat. And so a lot of the times, some reputable breeders will actually keep the babies and try to get them to eat before they sell them to the public, but a lot of them don't. A lot of these guys are a big pain in the butt, and people that do breed them, they're breeding a million other animals, and they don't really have the time to put into these babies. And unfortunately, they just try to pop them out and then get them out as fast as possible and let you guys have to deal with figuring out how to get them to eat. So just be very careful and make sure to mention to the breeder and ask if they are already eating or not, because it is the hardest thing for sure. So if you noticed how they're rattling their tails, not only are they striking at me, but you can see, I don't know if this one or that one is rattling their tail, but you can see the end of it. Let me try to find one real fast. Let me get this little guy out without him being too crazy. So you can see the end of this snake's tail is almost like a reddish color, and that is what they do in the wild. That whole tail wiggle when they're trying to eat. They'll sit on a tree branch, they'll wiggle that little worm-like tail and try to lure in a bird to eat a worm, pretty much. So they just sit there, wiggle that little worm tail, a bird comes along thinking it's a worm, and then they ambush attack it and swallow it whole. Very, very cool.
When it comes to hardiness, we give the Insularis pit viper a score of 4 out of 5. I am here making a big assumption. I'm assuming that your Insularis pit viper is captive bred. They do seem to be available at reasonable prices captive bred, so there is no real reason to get an import unless you're a breeder looking to diversify your bloodlines. If you are a breeder of these snakes, this video is not for you, but thank you for joining us anyway. Please comment anything that you think people need to know that we didn't cover down in the comments. It isn't easy finding good information about these snakes, and I'm sure we have a lot to learn from you. But generally speaking, these seem to be pretty hardy, assuming that their enclosure, including temperature gradients, ventilation, and humidity, are maintained properly. When it comes to availability, we give the Insularis pit viper a score of 2 out of 5. And the blue seems to be about as common as the green in the pet trade. Obviously, not in the wild. The yellow is considerably less common, and other colors possibly less common still. But this is a video about the blue color phase specifically, so 2 it is. And that's fine. It means that you aren't generally going to see them at pet shops and expos, but if you want one and it's legal where you live, you can probably get one. Though you might need to be on a wait list from a breeder for a bit. And that's fine. You're very likely to need to get your ducks in a row anyway. Not just enclosure, but legal hoops with your city, county, state, and country. If you decide today that you want Insularis pit viper, you might not be able to have it by tomorrow.
5 days, but I'm mad now.
When it comes to upfront costs, we give the blue Insularis pit viper a score of 3 out of 5. This really isn't as expensive of a snake as you would think, assuming that you already have your venomous snake permits. If not, the cost will really be more in terms of your time than your money. The enclosure can be a big, beautiful, bioactive setup with lots of perches. This isn't the cheapest type of enclosure, but they don't cost a fortune either. And this is the kind of snake that you want to show off, so show it off. But all said and done, it may be cheaper than an emerald tree boa or a green tree python, as long as you don't need to go to the hospital. But you might. And that is why there's more demand for the aforementioned snakes, and thus a higher price tag. And that is why, overall, we give the blue Insularis viper a score of 2.6 out of 5, which is the same score that we gave to green iguanas. And, to be perfectly honest, that seems about right. If you want a beautiful arboreal green reptile that also comes in blue and yellow and that could cost you a finger, but probably not your life, then green iguanas and Insularis vipers are similarly bad ideas. If that sounds crazy, you should totally watch our video about green iguanas. But the reality is that if you want one of the most beautiful of all snakes, and it needs to be a viper, and it needs to be blue, then the blue Insularis might be the best pet snake for you. As always, like and subscribe, and we hope to see you real soon.
Lots of little strikes.
Why, thank you. Blue Insularis, due to their scientific name. If you could have one go through your gauge, that would be the best.
Oh yeah, perfect. I put snakes through my ears.
Well, these are awesome. Thank you so much, Tyler.
Of course, man.
Glad you were here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here.